Hello and welcome everybody to our continuing Visiting Artists lecture series. And we will have two more this semester. One will be with Mendy and Keith Obadieki. Does anybody take a course with them in the communications department? Do you know who they are? They're artists, but they're also, Keith is also a professor here at William Patterson in the communications department. That's going to be a really interesting thing. That's on March 22nd. And then on April 12th, again, we're going to have another lecture. I'm forgetting who it is right now. Do you guys remind me? Yeah, Michael Suh, right. A Chinese curator at the Beijing Museum of Contemporary Art. So great. So today we've got Craig Freeman, who is a public artist with over 20 years of experience using emergent technologies to produce large-scale public works at sites where the forces of globalization are impacting the lives of individuals in local communities. His work seeks to expand the notion of public by exploring how digital networked technologies is transforming our sense of place. Freeman is a founding member of the international artist collective Manifest.AR, and he has produced work and exhibited around the world, including at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, FACT Liverpool, Kunsthallen Nicolage Copenhagen, Triennial de Milano, the Institute of Contemporary Art Boston, and the Museum of Contemporary Art Beijing. In 2015, he was the recipient of a commission from the Los Angeles County Museum of Arts Art and Technology Program. In 2016, he will travel to Wuhan, China, as part of the American Arts Incubator Program administered by 01. He has also had work commissioned by Rhizome.org and Turbulence.org. His work has been reviewed in the New York Times, El País, Liberation, Wired News, Art Forum, 10/8, Z Magazine, Afterimage, Photo Metro, New Art Examiner, Time, Harper's, and Der Spiegel. Christiana Paul, curator at the museum, at the Whitney Museum of American Art, cites Freeman's work in her book, Digital Art, as does Lucy Lepard in The Lure of the Local, and Margaret Lovejoy in Digital Currents, Art in the Electronic Age. His writing has been published in Rhizomes, Leonardo, the Journal of Visual Culture, and Exposure. Freeman received a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of California, San Diego in 1986, and a Master's of Fine Arts degree from the University of Colorado, Boulder in 1990. He's currently a professor of new media art at Emerson College in Boston. Freeman writes, quote, "If Andy Warhol set out to create a distinctly American art form in the 20th century, I identify with those who seek to create a distinctly global art form in the 21st. So without further ado, join me in welcoming Craig Freeman.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you all for coming and taking a day off of this early spring weather to sit in a darkened room with me. And thanks for the students, too, who's been hosting me today as we go. I want to frame what I'm going to say for the next hour or so in the context of work that I'm currently engaged in. Michael and I just got back from a show that opened last night called Moving Image in Manhattan. And so I've been busy with that, but now I have to turn my attention to this project that I'm going to be doing in Silicon Valley. I'm going to be flying out on Thursday, and it kind of all hell was breaking loose over email while I was trying to deal with Moving Image last night. I managed to put the fires out, but I'm having to it's a rather publicly sensitive project, and so I wanted to kind of run the project by you guys and kind of wrap this up as we go. But in order to do that, I want to kind of trace a broad trajectory of the work that I've done over the last couple decades, and with the intention of kind of expressing to you the possibilities of art for public action and art that seeks to address and actually contribute to political, environmental, and social change in our culture. And in order to do that, I'm going to back way up. You guys can go ahead and sit down somewhere if you like. There's plenty of chairs. Yeah. Thanks for coming. Yeah, thank you. Thank you all. It's a nice big group. So I'm going to dive right in. I'm going to back way up to kind of the early days of my career and to just kind of frame this argument that I want to end with this project that I'll be turning my attention to now in San Jose. In the second half of the 20th century, Rocky Flats was one of a network of 17 nuclear weapons facilities operated under the direction of the Department of Energy. It was the only plant that manufactured the plutonium detonation systems or triggers for the nation's nuclear arsenal throughout the Cold War. In the summer of 1989, Rocky Flats was the subject of an FBI investigation. The resulting inquiry led to the suspension of plutonium operations and made public a history of gross environmental mismanagement, including the detections of 62 pounds of plutonium dust in the ductwork of the ventilation system, enough to build 6 nuclear weapons. To this day, it is considered to be one of the most contaminated sites in the world, although it's being redeveloped as a housing development as we speak. In the late 1980s, I moved to Boulder, Colorado to pursue my Master's of Fine Arts degree based on my interest of using emerging technology to invent new forms of interventionist public art, addressing the great human rights and environmental issues of our time. Before I had arrived, a group of environmentalists known as the Citizens Against Billboards on Highway 93 had organized a successful boycott against a group of billboards that were lined up in a row just outside the front gates of the Rocky Flats plant. The ads, located along one of the most scenic parts of the drive along the Rocky Mountain Front Range, were considered an eyesore. Plutonium contamination is, of course, invisible. Unable to convince local businesses to advertise on the billboards, the owner was driven out of business and the billboard structures stood empty for several years before I got there. This image shows the proximity of the billboard structures to the Rocky Flats plant, which is often depicted just as a kind of hazy image of the water tower, kept necessarily nondescript for media, and then the Denver skyline just 11 miles downwind. When the issues surfaced in the media of Rocky Flats, I mean, it was, as I say, often that image of that water tower that was the only image of Rocky Flats. So I wanted to address this issue of kind of image and how artists might intervene. I recognized that the billboard's potential for public art, and I began making proposals using early Macintosh desktop computing technology. Greenpeace got wind of the project and offered to fund its production. Operation Green Run 2 consisted of 11 10 by 40-foot billboard faces made up of over 2,000 individually printed bitmap images per billboard. And they were printed on an early Macintosh computer in a simple office laser printer, not unlike the ones we still use today 25 years later. But it was the emerging technology of the time. And here you see the project starting to take shape in the old racquetball court that the university allowed me to use as a studio. Keep in mind that commercial billboards are hand-painted at this time. The technology to simply print a billboard would not exist for another 5 years. The half-life of plutonium is 250,000 years. I was talking to the graduate students over lunch, and we were kind of talking about this idea of what a thesis is, actually. And students will tend to kind of think of it as a project, and we're going to kind of culminate your studies with this with a project, and that'll be your thesis project, and you get your degree for that. When I work with my graduate students, I tend to want to get them thinking in a much broader scope. That the thesis is really kind of an idea, a kind of concept that can allow you to craft create a practice over a career. And so I'm pointing out in this case this idea of this ended up being my thesis project at the University of Colorado in Boulder. But you know, this is the time that I kind of started thinking of this idea of using emerging technologies to produce large-scale public artworks at sites where the forces of globalization are impacting the lives of local individuals and local communities. So that was kind of the thesis concept, and you'll see that thread lacing its way all the way through my activities for the next 25 years. I seek to expand the notion of how public by exploring how digital network technology is transforming our sense of place. Let's try to do this then.
Today, Greenpeace unveiled 11 billboards along Highway 93 near the Rocky Flats plant. They graphically warn about what Greenpeace calls the toxic effects of Rocky Flats. Kim Christensen reports it started a battle among people who are on the same side.
They depict the nuclear nightmare, a fluorescent warning of the dangers posed by Rocky Flats. Greenpeace says the company that owns the billboards offered them for 6 months free of charge. Along with the CU Art Department, Greenpeace created what it calls an environmental art project. But to some Boulder residents, they're an eyesore. They say a billboard is still a billboard.
I don't know whether they're environmental nitwits or environmental traitors.
It is the right message. That is, we agree with closing Rocky Flats, but it's clearly the wrong medium. These billboards are a blight on the landscape.
If we don't get this plant closed, the view of the Boulder Flatirons from Highway 93 is going to be the least of their worries.
The billboards not only ask people to think about Rocky Flats, they want them to do something. They suggest that you call Governor Romer and ask him to take some action. About 10,000 people will drive past their message every day. Greenpeace hopes it'll keep Rocky Flats closed. Opponents want that too, but not this way. At the Greenpeace news conference, both sides got into a shouting match.
Don't close Rocky Flats, but close Rocky Flats. Don't do it with billboards. Close Rocky Flats. Use billboards. Don't use them billboards. Rocky Flats is going to kill us.
Right or wrong, the billboards will be up at least 6 months. Kim Christensen, 9 News.
Sounds like they need some cheerleaders out there. Last night, the Boulder City Council passed a resolution to send a letter of protest to Greenpeace. Boulder Mayor Leslie Durgan says the letter will say, in essence, it is the right message, but the wrong way to say it.
Great. Still kind of stands up after all these years.
For you how to say it the right way?
The question is what you do instead. It was images like this that of environmentalists apparently fist fighting that provided the necessary spectacle appeal to vault the project into international spotlight. Think of media as a kind of virtual reality, which of course it is, and that virtual reality can be intervened in. The final decision to shut down plutonium operations for good and shift the efforts at Rocky Flats to cleanup was quietly taken during the media firestorm that followed this project. And the reason I'm returning to this project after all these over 2 decades is that it demonstrates this early interest of mine of emergent technology as art practice and public art as intervention. Intervention in both the institutions of high culture and intervention into government policy in the institutions of the nation state. Early in 1997, I began work on Imaging Place, a place-based virtual reality project that combined panoramic still photography and video with three-dimensional virtual reality to document situations where the forces of globalization are impacting the lives of individuals and local communities. And I almost hate to should I try and play the video one more time? Let's see if I can do it more successfully. Sir. The idea that it was this kind of global interface, and you could zoom in, progressively till we got down to ground level. The goal of the Imaging Place project is to develop the technologies, the methodologies, and the content for a truly immersive and navigatable narrative based in real places around the world. It was also the beginning of experimentation with the notion of the internet as a new type of public space. Although I was never able to put this particular form of the work onto the internet, it was just simply too much bandwidth for the technology that existed at the time. But you can, the Imaging Place work was inspired by the work of Guy Debord and the Situationist International and their concept of psychogeography. Not long after its founding in Paris in 1957, the Situationists developed the idea of the derive, a kind of open passage, walk, or a drift, where participants were encouraged to ignore the normal traffic flows and circulations of the planned urban developments and instead move through a city in a way that focused on mood. The goal was to track the emotions, the feelings, and the atmosphere of a place to find what they called the plaque tournant. A plaque tournant was a turntable or hub or a vortex of center or power where the forces come together to create a particularly strong atmosphere. So when you got down to ground level, and in this case it's at the US-Mexico border between San Diego and Tijuana, you would end up in early panoramic imagery that you'd be able to look in all directions. And then there was a mapping system that would kind of keep track of where you moved as you go. So you could determine which way you go. And as you encountered people, the story of the place would kind of unfold. The Imaging Place project went for many years, and it includes hundreds of individual locations and hours of content from places all over the world. Imaging Place grows out of an ongoing collaboration with Greg Ulmer, a scholar who we were talking about over lunch, and his investigation of what he has referred to as electracy. Electracy describes a kind of literacy or skill and facility necessary to exploit the full communicated potential of the new electronic media, such as multimedia, hypermedia, social software, virtual reality, and now augmented reality as well.
What we're trying to do now in choral space, online, digital memory, is to have movement through a space be an act of reasoning by which a person could think about and understand and reason about problems and the world. We took a situationist approach to this. The situationists
what I'm interested in figurative language, especially metaphor, and just the translation of metaphor in Greek means to carry across. And if you translate metaphor into Latin, it translates as transfer.
That was enough of that. That video would go on. It's online if you want to kind of take a look at it. But you kind of get the idea of that. On May 25th, 2007, after executives from Google attended an exhibition of Imaging Place at Evos Art in Lowell, Massachusetts, the first version of Google Street View was released. This was more recent, but still a kind of legacy version of Imaging Place. And so the reason I put this up is it kind of shows how technology evolves over time. It's important for artists to kind of be able to adapt to it. But then
I'm from a district called The Bone. It's in North Belfast. And I'm now working in West Belfast. And where we were born, there was no peace wall or anything. It was in a small district with 4 streets, but it was all a Catholic area, and it was surrounded by Protestants, or Loyalists as they're called now. And there was no peace wall, but there was a type of an invisible peace wall where you knew not to go into their streets.
As you're probably understanding, this is a project called Imaging Belfast, and it kind of went throughout Belfast, but this particular part, we're working our way through the old Conway Mill neighborhood, which was the place that the Troubles had broken out exactly 40 years to the day that this work was made. And we're making our way down towards the peace wall. It keeps showing up. And in the virtual version, you'd be able to, there it is in the background, kind of. But so this was my first kind of foray into using immersive cinematography. So this was before any equipment or software was made, and now the immersive filmmaking is all the buzz right now, and they're making the proper cameras and so forth. I was just simply retrofitting a catatropic mirror lens on top of a conventional video camera, and you kind of set it on a tripod, and it would shoot up at the mirror, and you'd end up with a kind of donut image that you could unfold and then wrap into spheres in Unity or some other game engine in this case. But the important point I'm trying to make here is again this. Yeah, I think it's actually completed here. Sorry, I'm botching this so bad here. There we go. There's this kind of continuity that goes from projects to projects over time, and ultimately it's about this idea of kind of how space is conceived of in this new digital era. Since 2002, I've worked on the corner of Tremont and Boylston Street, overlooking the historic Boston Common, the first public park in the United States. As I walk across the park every morning, I often contemplate the role that the town square plays in shaping of political discourse and national identity formation. Essentially, all the uprisings of the century were centered in the public squares. However, the physical location is now augmented and supported by social media and mobile networks. This is AR Occupy Wall Street in October of 2011. Manifest.AR was an international artist collective working with emergent forms of augmented reality as interventionist public art. The group formed after the groundbreaking uninvited augmented reality intervention at the Museum of Modern Art in the fall of 2010. It is now the artist, not the curator, who decides which artworks can be placed where. We saw this medium as a way of transforming public space and institutions by responding to and overlaying the configuration of located physical meaning. Many of the people who show up in this video are also at the show in Moving Image. That's Will Pappenheimer. Mark Skowarek, who was one of the early founders of, was one of the founders as well of Manifest.AR. So did you guys, so you understand this, right? We did an entire exhibition of our own artwork without ever telling the curators or the directors that it was there. And then we let word of it out on social media, and then hundreds of people were showing up to the museum looking at artworks that the curators didn't know even existed. I think the best thing to do is just let the YouTube videos play out, and then it works, right? There you go. So this question of who will assert dominion over the virtual reality that is now forming in the proximity of our lived lives, right? There's this kind of idea of this virtual reality that's out there now. And our encounters are every day. Whenever you try and connect to a Wi-Fi signal or get a cell signal on your phone, you're interacting with this virtual space. And so what I've been trying to do since this time is give this this new reality form. So that question of who will assert dominion over this virtual space can be asked of institutions, of the curators at MoMA, for instance, but it can also be asked of governments in the nation state. So this was an early project of Tank Man in Tiananmen Square, which is famously the image was scrubbed from the image search engines in China. It disappeared from search engines in those big conflict that Google had with the government of China, and eventually now you still can't get access Google on Chinese computers, right? And it had to do with the idea that images do have power and meaning, and they still haven't figured out a way to censor the augmented Tank Man back in Tiananmen Square. The other kind of indelible image of the Tiananmen Square uprising was the goddess of democracy, which was a 30-meter tall plaster statue that the art students built in the Tiananmen Square, taunting government officials to tear it down, which of course they did. Whereas the public square was once the quintessential place to air grievances, display solidarity, express differences, celebrate similarities, remember, mourn, and reinforce shared values of right and wrong, it is no longer the only anchor for interactions in the public realm. The geography has been relocated to a novel terrain, one that encourages the exploration of mobile location-based public art. Moreover, public space is now truly open as artworks can be placed anywhere in the world without the prior permission from curators, governments, public authorities, or other tastemakers, with profound implications for art in the public square and the discourse that surrounds it. In the early 1990s, we witnessed the migration of the public sphere from the physical realm, the town square with its print augmentation, to the virtual realm, to the placelessness, the everywhere but nowhere of the internet. And in effect, the global digital network has facilitated the emergence of a new virtual space which corresponds to the physical geography around us. The public sphere is now crashing back down to place in the form of place-based virtual and augmented reality without losing its distributed character or its connections to the vast resources of the worldwide digital network. Thumbs up. Incidentally, another example of this was the uprisings in the Arab Spring, which in Cairo, for instance, still centered at the crowd gathered in the public square, but then the protest was augmented by Twitter and other social networks, right? So everybody knew when to show up. So it was like this extension out into the network of public space. Commissioned by the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, their Artist Response program, Orators, Rostrums, and Propaganda Stands, was based on the work of Gustav Klusis, including his designs for screen, radio, orators, rostrums, and propaganda stands from 1922, which were never actually built. Klusis was trying to harness the emerging technology of his time, radio, amplified audio, the cinema, to create a new form of public art for the public square, recognizing that traditional forms of public art, such as bronze, equestrian statues and marble, would be too time-consuming and expensive for the Bolshevik Revolution. They needed Klusis and his contemporaries proposed relatively inexpensive structures which could be quickly assembled, just with instructions, in the public spaces to communicate complex political ideas to a largely illiterate proletariat. So in addition to being shown in Los Angeles, this project kind of went around the world. This was in Copenhagen. This is at Speaker's Corner in Singapore. It's the only place in Singapore where you can go speak publicly for free, but you still have to get a permit to do it. But I didn't have to get permits to put the orators there. So, okay. So a little dark turn here, but it's an important project. This idea of what public artists do in the public square. It's monumental, but it's also memorial often because it has to do with the crafting of public identity. So it's how we remember collectively, right? The Border Memorial Fronteras de los Muertos is an augmented reality public art project and memorial dedicated to the thousands of migrant workers who have died along the U.S.-Mexico border in recent years trying to cross the desert Southwest in search of work and a better life. The project allows people to visualize the scope of loss of life by marking each location where human remains have been recovered along the border and the surrounding desert. This image is from the border fence near Arizona's Lukeville border crossing. And this is a visualization of the database, not through the phone, but just in Google Earth as I was doing the development work on it. In that empire, the art of cartography attained such perfection that a map of a single province occupied the entirety of a city, and the map of the empire, the entirety of a province. In time, those unconscionable maps no longer satisfied, and the Cartographers Guild struck a map of the empire whose size was that of the empire, and which coincided point for point with it. The following generations, who were not so fond of the study of cartography as their forebears had been, saw that that vast map was useless, and it was without some pitilessness was it that they delivered it up to the inclemencies of sun and winters. In the deserts of the West, still today, there are tattered remains of that map, inhabited by animals and beggars. In all the land, there's no other relic of the disciplines of geography. Or you might recognize that as Jorge Luis Borges on the Exactitude of Science, famous short film. Okay, now I'm going to try it. This would go on, so I'm going to try and stop this and see if I can get away with it. Based on a traditional form of wood carving from Oaxaca, the virtual augmentation object consists of a life-size, three-dimensional geometric model of a skeleton effigy, or what's known as a calaca. Calacas are used in commemoration of lost loved ones during the Mexican Dias de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead festivals. This image is one from the many locations in Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument. And this is in a cabbage patch outside of Yuma. Imagine now the entire mobile internet and its physical manifestations of place as a worldwide public sphere or square. This is on location with one of my graduate students. I took a couple of my graduate students out to the desert last year, and we're working on a documentary film that kind of, we rented a 4-wheel drive and rode through some of the more desolate places in the desert. Incidentally, I grew up on the border in San Diego, and it was just kind of a understood part of the economy that there was fluidity, that there was a porousness to it, and people would come back and forth to work during the day. And it was in the 1990s, actually, in a Democratic administration, the Clinton administration, where they began to militarize the borders, and they started to build the original walls through the cities, through Juarez and El Paso and San Diego, San Ysidro. And it was at that point that the migrant workers, although they were still much needed in the economy, were forced into these very, very severe conditions, and that's when the deaths started to really skyrocket. Any more building and fortifying and militarizing of the border will just certainly result in many, many more deaths. So, it's kind of like, I don't know what your politics are for the border, but, there's got to be some empathy towards the movement of people in this day and age. Hans Richter was a collaboration by myself and Will Pappenheimer, again, who's in the show down at Moving Image. This project was part of the retrospective exhibition of Hans Richter's encounter at LACMA during the summer of 2013. It was installed in a section of the exhibition that Timothy Benson, the curator, dedicated to the representation of film und Foto, or the FIFO exhibition, which took place in Stuttgart in 1929 for you art historians, and for which Hans Richter served as a film curator. Hans Richter reimagines this groundbreaking exhibition in response to the emergent technology of our time. Richter and other avant-garde artists of Europe and Russia were committed not only to the idea that a new visual language needed to be invented, but that cinema should shed its reliance on the narrative forms of the past. They were trying to break with the use of a theater as an interface metaphor for film. Early film was most often made by setting up actors in front of a camera as if to make a play, and the film was then displayed on a screen in front of an audience as if the screen was a stage. Many of the principles of the 20th century avant-garde relating to the need for the invention of new visual language stuck, and in fact formed the basis for the construction of meaning in contemporary cinema, like montage by Sergei Eisenstein, for instance. But this idea of expanded cinema was expanded cinema space that envelops and immerses the audience has gone largely unrealized, and will perhaps find its expression in virtual and augmented reality. I hope to extend this line of inquiry of Richter that Richter and others began in the early 20th century. The questions they raised in response to the emerging technologies of their time are questions that will never be fully answered and must be continued to be asked in the 21st century. Created in collaboration with Greg Ulmer, again, the School Shootings Memorial created a lasting monument to victims of school shootings You can simply download and launch the mobile augmented reality browser and aim the device's camera at the open space just west of the U.S. Capitol building on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., which of course is our national public square. And you can imagine, we can't even agree on simple rules of guns in this country, let alone trying to get permission to do a memorial to the victims of Sandy Hook on the National Mall, right? But you don't need the permission anymore. This was at this was at the Cochrane Gallery before it closed down. This was just a couple blocks from the mall. So there was an exhibition that supported the public artwork out in the mall. You might remember in the press coverage from the Virginia Tech shooting, when they were removing the bodies from the scene, the phones kept ringing in the backpacks of the victims. So if you look at the backpacks, they start ringing. MetroNext, a portal to a new reality. This was a virtual version of it at Little Berlin Gallery in Philadelphia in 2011. But I want to bring up this idea of kind of portals, because I've been working with this notion that we need a place to enter this virtual experience of ours. And we need to kind of help with that. We need a kind of physical transition point to allow us to kind of enter this new experience, right? But the first versions of MetroNext were kind of set up in various locations so you could be transported conceptually from one city to the other through the subway. In 2012, I had the opportunity to actually fabricate a replica of a vintage New York City subway station. So this is the plans. And then we put it back in Grand Central Station just on the granite floor. But it's nothing but wood and, paint, and it didn't go anywhere. It was just on the granite floor. But people would come around as if they were going to board the train. But you could read the QR code on the signage. It was MetroNext's service to Zurich, and you would be transported to a street scene in Zurich. And another technology development in this project is the use of photogrammetry for the virtual assets. So some of you are studying photogrammetry. It's a technology that is really the future of photography, in that photographs can be taken hundreds at a time at various angles of people, places, or things, and then it can be run through computer software that can extract a three-dimensional model based on something called a point cloud. And so this is a street scene from Zurich, so you could walk around with your phone. We had like AR viewing stations set up as well for people who are less than technically inclined, but yeah, the Grand Central Station was filled with Zurich. Now, importantly, if you get, as dated as some of the early imaging place looks, it's just kind of important to kind of project forward, where in those days you were kind of moving through an interface and ultimately a kind of virtual space that was still kind of screen-based. But now with this technology, the world itself ends up being the interface. And but the same gesture of kind of moving through a physical location and creating this experience that can be repositioned anywhere in the world. It's kind of a question of ontology. We kind of thought for many years that we were standing on pretty firm ground in terms of what we regarded as real. And the ontology has always been, pondered by humans, but It's particularly now because if the last presidential election wasn't evidence enough that we no longer are sure what's real, and that the truth itself has been called into question, that we certainly need a new ontology. This is a project that you guys could go see down on, it's called 14th and AR. It was done with Art in Odd Places. It's still an active project, but I kind of went up and down 14th Street from Union Square to 9th Avenue and created, reproduced objects that just appeared, on the street, fire call stations, mailboxes, et cetera. And if you look at them, they kind of float off into oblivion. This is, okay, are we doing okay for time? Yeah. This was a project that I did in Liverpool called EEGAR, Things We've Lost. And the concept was to go around the city and just approach people randomly and simply ask them what they lost. And then I recorded their responses and then made a virtual object based on what they said and put it back where we had the encounter in the first place. So it's this idea of kind of memory and how memory is mapped into the city. And so this is a little video that we just compiled with some of the responses in Liverpool.
A bit earlier I lost my way. I was looking for probe records, just couldn't find it. Found it, everything's okay now.
But I got lost. To be honest with you, my ex-wife. Apart from that, my children.
What have we lost? In terms of personal loss? A husband, recently. That's all, really.
And a mum. My mum.
Recently?
Yeah.
Bit of our sanity over the years, I would imagine. But, we've got a bit of sense of humour to kind of compensate for it, hopefully.
Probably wisdom and experience to compensate for the loss of youth.
A few teeth. Colour of my hair.
Lost. Lost my phone on multiple occasions. And my wallet, house keys. Many, many things.
What have I lost? My sense of direction. Afraid nothing else really. Been pretty happy so far.
Lost quite a lot of money yesterday. Not lost, spent. Lost, I'm not sure really. That's it. That's my reaction.
Dignity. The past week.
My flat keys.
Family. What have we lost? Temper. I've lost my idea of where to go to university.
What have I lost? As a family member. I've lost my mother and my father over the last 4 years.
I suppose in life I've lost friends, but I've gained them.
What have we lost? Are you messing? We haven't lost anything, to be honest. We've got everything. Yeah. Happiness, and that's it really, yeah.
On Derby Day 2 years ago, I lost 20 quid. That was it.
Oh,
crush
it away.
Crushing. That's the only thing I've ever lost.
What have I lost? The biggest possession in my life. My ex-wife.
What have I lost? In terms of a possession, you mean? Anything? I've lost absolutely nothing.
Nothing. I think my phone. Just my phone. That's it.
I've lost inhibitions, time.
What have I lost? Youth. I've lost youth.
What have you lost? I've lost the plot.
You know, we rapping off the top, we've lost the plot, that's what we've lost. Yes, you know, we paid the cost to be the bosses, but you know, we're on top, kid.
Lost.
Yeah, you
Lost.
know that we're just
Lost.
lost on Bold Street.
Is that okay?
Awesome. So so you get the idea. Then the lost things appear all over the city, and you could tour the city looking for people's lost things. But collectively, it ends up being a kind of map of the collective identity of the city. This project has been done a couple different places. One was in Los Angeles. And that was at the point that I also started recreating the avatars too. The people who were saying what they lost then appeared back on the streets where they came from, using photogrammetry techniques. There's lost things. This is the lost students of Guerrero, if you remember the disappeared students down there. This is a lost red car on Wilshire. That's Emerson College on Sunset. Lost Fame, it sold used secondhand leather jackets. And Lost Freedom in Pershing Square. Yeah. This is a little tough to kind of go here, but it was called the EGAR because I was experimenting with this idea of thinking these things back into existence. So we hooked the brainwave sensors. We invited people in. It was kind of a performance. It was set up like a medical exam or a lab, and we were kind of experimenting on the audience, and we would outfit them with EEG brainwave sensors. And then they'd be asked to think deeply about what it is they lost, and if they concentrated enough, then they would kind of conjure these objects back in, and they would appear in the space in front of them. Something out of the database of lost things from that particular city, in this case, Los Angeles.
Want to back up? There's someone there.
That's so crazy.
All right, dropping it down.
I can make it center, so it's really good.
Okay, almost dropping it down. I'll just start going through.
So that was just when you lost focus?
Yeah, so then
Yeah.
the paradigm.
You're pretty good at this. Like, able to go in and out of focus like that.
Oh yeah, I wrote the algorithm, so I had to.
You had lots of practice.
Yeah, I had lots of practice going up and down with it. So.
Wow, so cool.
So pulling it back up.
That's so insane how quick you are with that.
Okay. Just quickly, for those of you guys who are studying these kinds of things, this is how, they kind of under the hood a little bit with photogrammetry. So if you walk around a person, for instance, you photograph them many, many times, then it can be reconstructed into a point cloud at first, which are just positions in space with RGB values attached to each spot. And then, of course, those spots can be connected and create a polygon mesh. And then you have assets for either virtual or augmented reality. And I think that there's a version of this particular project this is Minsheng community in Wuhan. I'll talk a little bit about Wuhan. But this is a place in central China. But there's a version of it running on Vive. If you come into the lab, we have it running if you want to experience this on Vive. We also have some of the point cloud virtual experiences, which you kind of have to see on Vive. It doesn't work each other way. So the portal theme was indeed continued in Wuhan. When I went over with 01, as Michael had said, the idea is that I kind of went into the city and we taught a series of workshops in photogrammetry and augmented reality, and then worked with the community to identify how they were experiencing change. And so they would take me to these cities, and we would create these kind of virtual scenes, and then everybody could come to the portal to see the virtual experiences, right? So again, this kind of way of passing through. So. And just an image with the augmented reality around it. This is all making sense, right? You guys a little bit? Yeah. One of the most distinctive aspects of the city of Wuhan is that in the former foreign concessions. In the early 20th century, colonial powers were making incursions into central China along the Yangtze River, and many set up concessions which were kind of autonomous trade zones along the banks of the old Hankou. One of the present-day Wuhan's three sister cities. The foreign concessions included Britain, France, Japan, and importantly Russia. And the U.S. never owned a concession, but it was running gunboats up the Yangtze at the time. If any of you saw the Steve McQueen film Sand Pebbles, is a kind of classic. It was about the story of Wuhan and the rebellion that started there. When I went, I had the opportunity to go to Russia, and what I chose to do was to take this, the Panhof House, which was built by the richest man in China in 1909 by a guy by the name of J.K. Panhof. He was a Russian tea trader, and he built this palace. And then the rebellion happened, and they kicked all the foreigners out, including Panhof, and the housing was left over for common families and stuff, and has been occupied to this day by common families. But I put the project back in central St. Petersburg at a place called the Anna Akhmedova Garden. And Anna Akhmedova was famously a modernist poet that wrote during the time of the Bolshevik Revolution, which is a couple years after the uprising in China. And she was eventually imprisoned in one of the buildings around the garden by Stalin. So this ended up being a pretty appropriate place for that. Originally, we were going to build a portal, and it would have been based on one of the Clusis designs. We just lost permission to put the concrete footing in the ground at the last minute. But I'm still trying to work on bringing that project back and actually building one of Clusis's original orators for the first time in Russia. But we'll see. It might get very difficult to travel to Russia is part of the problem. What's that? Okay. It's actually good timing. So this gets us to last night at the moving image. Here's Michael and I were there. I think I can quickly, I'm just going to plug in the iPad here and see if it comes up. So I've made the iPad think that it's down in New York, in Manhattan at moving image. But otherwise, there we go. So this is virtual St. Petersburg, and it is the size of St. Petersburg, so the buildings are all building size. And it's laid out according to the size and scale of the city of St. Petersburg, but in Manhattan, if that makes sense. Okay, I'll leave this iPad here so you guys can see it after question and answer. Okay, so one last thing I want to talk about here, sorry if I replug the computer, is San Jose. So I had the opportunity to go to Silicon Valley and build another portal. And yeah, sorry, did that again. Hang on. And I'll wrap with this last thing. I just wanted to run this by you because I kind of wanted to get your feelings about it. So the original portal was, the original design was kind of based on early mission architecture. And the idea was that it would be, again, a portal to these virtual experiences. And the virtual experiences meant to be an investigation kind of the housing crisis in the Bay Area, where it's becoming so expensive to live that people are being driven out of the traditionally family housing stock and so forth. And to range the entire spectrum, though, as things kind of progressed in the last few months, we were kind of thinking this was a lot to kind of take on for how short an amount of time it would take. And so the design kind of morphed, and I started thinking that what really needed to happen was that we need to actually secure the virtual border. and so instead of an archway, the design started to become looking much more like a border checkpoint. And so the idea is that you could read the QR code here, and then we would open the gate and you'd be allowed into the virtual experience. And we're going to be meeting with advocates for the homeless, and I want to try and make the virtual assets based on these kind of tent cities. If you've been to California recently, there's these kind of tent cities that are starting to spring up under the bridges and underpasses and that sort of thing. And so the idea is that it'd be the security checkpoint into the tent cities. But I think it spooked the city officials and stuff who had originally approved the rather more benign kind of approach to the archway. And so I'm kind of currently putting those fires out. So thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions. I don't know if you have to go to other classes. Thank you.
You got any questions?
Just in terms of like quality for your work, do you think that so in these last few things, some pieces were missing of some of the virtual reality? Do you think that affects essentially the experience of it, or for your work in particular, do you think that's okay just because the concept is so strong?
I think it's important for anybody who's serious about digital media to embrace its own aesthetic, So I kind of think of it more like painterly, like almost impressionistic painting. And furthermore, I also think that it's conceptually it fits because this virtual space I'm talking about is kind of just becoming, it's like still in fragments, it's imperfect, it's glitchy. And so I really don't want to work with polish. Also, it's important for me to be able to work quickly because I often only get a very rare opportunity. It's not like I can do a careful scan of these places. Sometimes it's more like it's more in the tradition of street photography, where I'm just trying to capture, instead of just simply an image, a kind of experience, but in the kind of style of street photography. So yeah.
A lot of your work has to do with, because of its format, the notion of like knowledge and access, of how to like access these spaces. How do you resolve that for viewers who might not be in the know, especially with your sort of guerrilla entrance into that museum space?
It's a great question. So there's I hope a pretty good answer to that. First of all, if you think about access in terms of the number of people who are fluent with the technology for the experience as compared to how many people even at its best go to a museum like even the best museums like MoMA. That's a fraction of the number of people who know how are conversant with this technology to be able to make these experiences for starters. But more importantly to your question is this idea of the transition from the physical reality into this broader public sphere that the internet represents means that if you're going to be making art that's invisible, you have to become conversant in the virtual reality of social networks, for instance. So Manifest.AR, people knew to go because they heard about it on Facebook and so forth, right? So you're leveraging the social networks the same way they did at the Arab Spring to get the word out about projects that otherwise people just simply don't know are there, But you also kind of building a physical thing where it's, in public space can be kind of powerful. Yep.
Good. Any other questions? I just want to mention two things. We've had Chris Manzione, who was also a member of Manifest.AR. He is an alum of William Patterson in the art program, and also been very active, and he's part of this exhibition that is open in Manhattan, which is on 11th Avenue between 27th and 28th Street, and it's open until Thursday at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, something like that. The other thing is that we've also had Will Pappenheimer on campus. That might have been long enough ago that nobody in the room was a student then, but I want to remind you that these lectures are online at New Jersey Vid, NJ Vid, and if you do a search for, actually for the Department of Art lectures, you'll get all the lectures that we've had. There have been 2 or 3 other lectures that we've done which included augmented reality. And we're really happy today that, this guy is like one of the first people out there in this environment doing this stuff. It's kind of amazing that he's here today with us. So thanks again for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all.
I guess I would ask one other question, and that was, you mentioned early on that you had done these place-finding applications or visualizations of how it might work on the internet, and then Google came to your show and said, whoa, wait a minute, and that became, in some sense, at least an example or maybe even a model for Google to address what became ubiquitous now. Right. How do you feel about that, being co-opted by big media and big companies so readily, so easily?
I mean, I'm pretty firmly committed to the idea of open culture and open source, and as an academic and as an artist, my mission is to, propagate ideas, rather than make money somehow. I'm kind of flattered that we're interested enough to kind of get what it was I was trying to do, cool. And then actually make. But if you approach it, this is the thing about the thesis. If you approach what you're doing, with this kind of the vision beyond. And you start taking up the mantle of kind of invention in what you do. This is what's so cool about new media, because it requires this kind of commitment to invention. Then it's necessarily the case that you are as very well positioned to have agency in determining what this becomes. In other words, that this is the whole Mark Pinsky digital native, digital immigrant thing. You are the generation. Michael and I, we've probably become pretty fluent. We can speak this language pretty fluently, but it's still a second language to us, and we'll always have an accent, so to speak, right? Whereas you kind of grew up playing the video games and having the internet, you cut your teeth on this technology, and part of Greg Ulmer's point is that the result is a different cognition. It's a physically different brain. And so you guys are at the cusp of being able to be the first authors that speak this language natively. If you understand that, that's super powerful, because it means that there's lots of opportunity to make an original contribution. And that's our hedge against technological determinism, right? This is probably something you guys have studied, right? The kind of idea of technological determinism is that it's happening on an evolutionary scale, and we have no say in the matter. We're going to become cyborgs, and that's that. The anti-technological determinism would be that the working practices and the way that we store and disseminate collective wisdom needs to be invented, just like the technology needs to be invented. The institutions that will organize this collective knowledge needs to be invented, just like universities were in Plato's time, right? And for the literate people, and so forth. So it's actually a really exciting time for you guys, and I think that Michael and Will and Chris and I have maybe done our little bit of contribution to kind of hacked away a little hiking trail or whatever. But there was a recognition yesterday that all of a sudden all of the rest of the milieu of the art world is all of a sudden paying attention, where they always said, oh no, not that, that's too threatening, right? What does it mean? What does a museum mean when you don't need a tastemaker anymore, right? Threatens the very existence of the institutions. Now they're starting to understand that they need to change too, and that's kind of exciting. The conservators, the curators, the critics, and you see this as a test case for the culture more broadly. Art is like a test case where we see these other dynamics kind of playing out on a global scale with all of our politics and social culture and so forth.
Okay, guys, thanks so much. Have a great day.